Wow, the trains on this plane go really fast. If you ain't got a mount, they're the fastest way round. We're just lucky the conductor up there owed me a favor. So, what do you know about this here varmint you're chasing? Well, apparently they look just like me, close enough that they can fool an expert investigator. Well, if you're looking for a criminal, Tarnation will be the first stop. It'll be a bit before we get there. You got any good stories? Well, mostly when I have downtime, I make videos talking about magic cards. Y'all sure like that game, huh? Well, anything catch your eye recently? Well, it would definitely have to be Kellan. He's super cool and has a lot of interesting ways to play with him. Out goes, kid. Ain't that boy a criminal? Crime isn't just black and white, Cassie. People don't always have a choice to do something that they don't want to do. Well, right then. Do your yapping. I gotta do some thinking. Okay. Outlaws of Thunder Junction is filled with fun cards, cool characters, and hats. Lots and lots of hats. We're basically Team Fortress 2 at this point with how many hats there are. There's so much to talk about, but we only have so long on this train ride, so today I want to talk about Kellan the Kid. Not only is seeing his growth over the past few months really awesome, but his card is super cool and synergizes super great with one of my favorite card types ever. That being said, I don't want to make you all wait any longer. Without further ado, let's start the show. So what's this Eldrainian ranger with a big thunder iron on his hip? Well, it's Kellan the Kid. For a green, a white, and a blue, you get a 3/3 legendary human fairy rogue with flying and lifelink. That's a heck of a lot of power and a heck of a lot of creature types for just 3 mana, but we're not done. He also lets you, whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, cast an extra permanent spell from your hand without paying its mana cost, as long as that costs less than the spell you cast from the Not Your Hand zone. Hey, he's efficient, but he's not a miracle worker, you know? Worried you'll miss out on the value if you don't have any spells that are cheap enough on hand? Well, in hand rather? Don't worry. If you don't, he lets you take a land card from your hand and slap it right onto the battlefield. Now, you might be wondering, this good egg in a rotten basket can't have that many ways to trigger that ability, right? You'd probably be surprised. There's tons of ways to trigger it. But there's only one way to know when I post new videos, and that's by subscribing. It lets me know that I'm doing a good job and it keeps this show on the road. Now, I could go on and on about every single card that could help you trigger Kellan's abilities, but I don't think this train ride nor your patience is going to last that long. So instead, I want to go over the cards that have built-in mechanics that do this. The first is the newest mechanic from Thunder Junction, Plot. Cards with Plot, like Rise of the Varmints here, have this powerful new mechanic. Rise of the Varmints is 3 and a green for a sorcery that gives you a number of 2/1 Varmint creature tokens equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. But what do we do if we don't have that many creatures in our graveyard? Well, that's where Plot comes into play. When a Plot card is in your hand, you have a few choices. Sure, you could just cast it, but what if we instead put it to exile to cast later in a truly mischievous plan? You can, instead, pay the Plot cost and shove it into exile. Then, at a later turn, we can cast it for free. We save 1 mana by waiting at least 1 turn and can wait for a more opportune moment. For example, if we cast Rise of the Varmints with only 2 creatures in our graveyard for its normal cost, that sounds kinda bad. But if we Plot it, we can then cast it when we have 100 creatures in our graveyard. Well, you couldn't really have that many, but getting like 10 of them would be pretty sweet. Especially if it's for free, and it gives Kellan a trigger, giving us a permanent spell that's 3 or less mana. That's a ton of value. Speaking of value, another mechanic you might recognize is Foretell. This mechanic is sorta similar to the last mechanic, but instead of paying for the spell now and casting it later, you put a bit of a down payment of 2 generic mana down instead, and can cast the spell for its Foretell cost later on. One of the best examples of this mechanic is Alrund's Epiphany. For 5 blue, you get a sorcery that gives you 2 1/1 bird tokens. That's it. That don't sound quite that good. Oh, and you get to take an extra turn. Reckon that'll do it then. Yep. But the best part is you can foretell it and it'll only cost 4 blue later. And if you have Kellan out, that's a free 7-drop. On account of it being a 7-cost spell, I reckon. That's right, Cassie. And the biggest difference between the two of these mechanics, while you Plot face up and your opponent can see your plans, you foretell face down, so your opponents might never know what's going on until it's too late. Imagine, someone could be plotting or foretelling our demise even now! Y'all mean your opponent in this here magic game, right? I mean, well, obviously, what else would I mean? Alright, you two. It's your job to go find Lucy. She can't have gotten too far, so be sure to look carefully. Well, I guess it's better than sitting around until the boss gets back. Do we know anything about this plane?
Why, my dearest Gabrielle, Thunder Junction is an uncharted plane full of possibility.
He's not wrong, but it's not uninhabited. Get in there, get her, and help her before she gets in over her head. She's an accomplished mage, but she's got her own limits.
You can count on us, Miss Giggles. We'll be at her side in a flash.
Yeah. what he said.
Now, do not worry, Gabrielle. Despite the harsh environs that surround us, I am quite certain I shall be able to use my breadth of knowledge to help navigate.
Founder.
Oh, so you have.
Trains are interesting, don't you think? One misplaced explosive and an entire plane's economy can tumble. Why do I feel like I'm in the middle of a cutaway? Anyway, another way to cast free spells is the Rebound ability. To show it off, we have a card from the Doctor Who Commander set, Quantum Misalignment. For 4 and a blue, you get a sorcery that lets you make a token copy of a creature you control, except it isn't legendary. You know, we could pick Kellan with that. The spell also has Rebound. Rebound spells, instead of going into your graveyard, if you cast them from your hand, they go to exile. Then, during your next upkeep, you can cast it for free without paying its mana cost. This card in particular synergizes really well with Kellan, letting you double up on his effects with multiple copies and triggering both the Kellan copies on the second cast. Rebound isn't a super common mechanic, only showing up occasionally in Commander products and back in the Tarkir sets. But I hear a rumor that we might be going back there soon, so keep an eye out for Rebound in the future. Flashback is another super popular mechanic that works really well with Kellan. To show off Flashback, here's Memory Deluge. For 2 and 2 blue, you get an instant that lets you look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana you spend to cast this. Since we paid 4 on the first go around, that means we're looking at 4 now. Then you can take 2 of the cards from among them and put them into your hand, and then shuffle the rest to the bottom. Now, that's cool and all, but what we care about is about the second cost. For 5 and 2 blue, you can do it again from the graveyard. That means we look at 7 cards, still adding 2, and then we can exile the spell after casting it, because if we could just cast it over and over again, that'd be too much value and you'd probably explode or something. Geez, there's a lot of different ways to cast spells from outside your hand, huh? Don't worry, you'll be ready to build your Kellan decks when Thunder Junction gets to your plane. Though it may take some time. Time counters, that is. Really? That's the one you're going with? That might not have targeted any folk, but I reckon that's as close to a crime as you're gonna get around here. Well, anyway, we're talking about Suspend with Inspiring Refrain. This spell is 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery that lets you draw 2 cards. That doesn't seem that good at all. That seems kind of bad. But it also exiles it with 3 time counters. What's a time counter? Well, let's take a look at the other way to cast this spell. Suspend. Suspend basically lets you pay for your spell with time and mana. For 2 and a blue, you can put Respiring Refrain into exile with 3 time counters on it. At the beginning of each of your upkeeps, you can remove a time counter. Once there's 0 time counters, you cast the spell from exile without paying the mana cost, and you trigger Kellan as well. Now, for the most part, you have to wait for your time counters to go away on their own unless you have some specific cards that mess with time counters, or you could do some time travel. Time travel is a mechanic from the Universes Beyond Doctor Who set that lets you add or remove time counters from basically everything you own. Roaring Fireplace here is an example, letting you increase the time counter it comes into play with to ramp and to add more colorless mana, and letting you tick down your Suspend cards to bring them out early. And finally, we have my favorite of all of these mechanics, Adventure! And to show it off, we'll show Kellan. Kellan, Inquisitive Prodigy, is 2, a green and a blue for a legendary 3/4 human fairy detective with flying and vigilance that, when he attacks, can blow up an artifact. And if you happen to own that artifact, you can draw a card. That's a lot of value on its own, letting us remove our opponent's artifacts or, getting some card advantage from our own, but we can also send him on an adventure. For a green and a blue, you can cast the sorcery half of Kellan from our hand called Tail the Suspect. This lets us put an additional land into play and gives us a clue token. Adventure is not only one of my favorite mechanics in the game, but it's also really good for Kellan the Kid specifically, giving us essentially 2 hands to play from. The cards we have on adventures can come into play, letting us double up with creatures or other cool spells in our normal hand. Not to mention all of the support for the mechanic is in this particular combination of colors, most notably Gorion Wise Mentor. This card is a white, a blue, and a green for a legendary 3/4 human wizard with vigilance and the ability to copy any of your adventure spells. So much value, I love me a good adventure. Now that that's all of the mechanics out of the way, let's talk about some other cards that you could put in here. Afraid that I'll have to wait, little miss. We're almost there. Looks like I'll need to wrap up the video soon, huh? Yeah, you alright, boss? Oh, I feel fine. The train, on the other hand...
What are you implying?
Well, as always, thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, hold on, y'all hear that? What are you... I believe what she was trying to say, our lovely audience, was au revoir.